everyone, welcome back to the Salem witch trials. So, let's continue where we left off, look at George Burroughs, as we were doing. The secretive and controlling George Burroughs would never have made violent threats in public, but Cotton Mather noted he had been infamous for the barbarous usages of his two successive wives, all the country over. John Putnam Sr. and his wife Rebecca testified that Burroughs was a very harsh, sharp man to his dutiful first wife. The minister was a small but rugged man, and known, as we have seen, for his great strength, be it with ability to carry barrels of molasses, or to pick up a long, heavy musket just by sticking his forefinger in the muzzle. He was comfortable on the frontier amid guns and combat, and acquitted himself well accompanying Colonel Benjamin Church and the troops into battle to defend Falmouth. Presumably, his remarkable strength, his rugged frontier character, and the rumours of mistreatment of his wives were known to the afflicted girls, and this projected a sinister image, for they reported the ghostly visit of Burroughs' two deceased wives. The spirits told Anne Putnam Jr. that he had been a cruel man to them. Their blood did cry for vengeance against Burroughs for his murdering them, and they believed he should be cast into hell. Anne was also visited by the ghosts of Deodat Lawson's first wife and daughter, as well as Goodman Fuller's wife, his first one, and they said Burroughs had killed them as well. Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and Susanna Sheldon would make similar claims. There was absolutely no evidence that Burroughs had a hand in anyone's death, but the placing of all this female blood on Burroughs' hands at least suggests that the afflicted believed Burroughs had abused his wives and failed in his matrimonial duties. Accusations against people of such high rank and social position were uncommon. When it did happen in large-scale European witchcraft outbreaks, it was usually due to condemned or confessed witches, implicating community leaders in an effort to bring the trials to an end. This is a sensible explanation, but it does not work for Salem, where the high-ranking people were accused by the afflicted, not by confessed witches. In Trier, Germany, in the 1580s, the usual pattern of accusations against poor, marginalised women broke down. A particularly cold period of the Little Ice Age led to a series of crop failures, which resulted in economic disaster and famine for a good number of farmers. Their plight led many to blame the rich for working with the devil to create their problems. After all, merchants who own large stores of grain would profit by the price increases and charge unseriously high interest rates to people desperate for money to buy food. The rich would even be described as driving their black Sabbaths in golden coaches. In Trier, witchcraft became a potent weapon used against wealthy and powerful men. Similar forces may have been at work at Salem. Certainly the Little Ice Age, as Mondominium, and the ongoing war meant that in 1692 a fair number of people were suffering economic distress. Under such circumstances, the elite may have become the most useful scapegoat. In addition to religious controversy, ideological disagreement, social jealousy, the accusations, as the case of George Burroughs and other community leaders show, great from local conflict. And they grew. Indeed, witchcraft was frequently a family or neighbourly crime, with accusations stemming from long-standing party disputes over boundary lines, wandering livestock, or even inheritances. In Salem village, as we have noted, the Putnam family seemed to be involved in many of the disputes in one way or another. Sarah Osborne's first husband, Robert Prince, was a kinsman of the Putnams. Soon after his death and her marriage to Alexander Osborne, the couple entered a protracted legal battle over her first husband's estate with her sons and with Thomas and John Putnam, the executors of the estate. The Putnams had their differences with others in the village, including Rebecca Nurse and her family. Sarah Holton's accusation against her neighbour, Rebecca Nurse, reflects this neighbourly conflict and shows a side of elderly Puritan saint rarely noted. Holton testified that 3 years earlier, an angry Rebecca came to our house and fell a railing at her husband, Benjamin Holton, because our pigs got into a field. The Holtons said their pigs were properly yoked and that the fault lay with the nurses, whose fence was down in several places. But nothing they said could pacify Rebecca, who continued railing and scolding, and then called her son to go and get a gun and kill our pigs and let none of them go out of the field. According to Massachusetts Bay law, the nurses had the right to kill the swine, and her threat to do so, after first seeking a neighbourly solution, suggests her frustration over the situation. Several days after the incident, Benjamin Holton was struck blind and stricken down 2 or 3 times. Then, 2 weeks before he died, he was taken with strange and violent fits, acting much like to our poor bewitched persons. Sarah's conclusion was that Rebecca had bewitched her poor husband. Boundary disputes, broken fences and trespassing animals were common problems that filled the dockets of early New England courts, and they quickly became part of the accusation pattern. The Holton-Nurse dispute was part of a recurring theme of fences, intruding spectral animals and harm to livestock in the witch trial depositions. Certainly witchcraft had been used in the past as a way to settle old scores and end long-standing legal disputes. Take, for example, the case of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Quaker George Walton. In the summer of 1682, Walton and his tavern, as noted earlier, were regularly attacked by unseen stone-throwing assailants. Some neighbours believed that the despised Walton and his debauched tavern were being attacked by stealthy neighbourhood boys. The aged Quaker probably believed this as well, but he used the attacks as a way to try and end a 30-year property dispute, charging his elderly neighbour Hannah Jones with witchcraft. The widowed Anglican saw through the tactic and levelled the playing field by accusing Walton of being a wizard. The nurses were involved in a similarly enduring grudge. The farm that Rebecca and Francis Nurse leased from Reverend James Allen was the focus of a long and complicated boundary dispute between Allen, the nurses, and the abutting Endicott and Putnam families. This dispute, and another between the Putnams and several Topsfield landowners, likely influenced the charges against Rebecca and her sisters, Mary Etsy and Sarah Cloyce. For the brother, Ensign Jacob Town, was one of the Topsfield men. Francis Nurse was also a central figure in the fictionalism that gripped Salem village and resulted in accusations. Nurse and Daniel Andrew were members of the Anti-Paris Village Committee, elected in 1691. 17 people accused of witchcraft were related or in some way connected with them and other leaders of Anti-Paris network, such as Peter Cloyce and Israel Porter. This included the accused members of the Bassett, Proctor, Jacobs and Town families. Others, particularly George Burroughs, were certainly victims of this factional split, even though Burroughs no longer resided in Salem village. Along with neighbourly and village factionalism, imported English regionalism may have played a part as well. 2/3 of the men accused of witchcraft in 1692 had surnames that had likely origins in Celtic fringe of Britain, the West Country, Wales, the North, or Scotland. The people from these regions had cultural as well as spiritual differences from the many Massachusetts settlers from the south and east of England, which was the real hotbed of Puritanism. In Andover, more than half of the accused there and in the adjoining Boxford were from families that had migrated from Scotland or Celtic fringe, but the same population produced a number of accusers as well. Andover had suffered more than a decade of discord, with people in the southern ends of town, including many Scots, tending to support the elderly senior Minister Francis Dane, while most residents in the north and preferred his young replacement, Thomas Bernard. Now, many residents of the southern end of Andover fell under suspicion of witchcraft, and their accusers tended to come from the north. Dane himself would escape formal charges, even though his own spectre was seen afflicting people. Doubts may have been cast on Dane for his unwillingness to testify years earlier against John Godfrey, a man habitually under suspicion of witchcraft. When Godfrey had been charged with witchcraft for the second time in 1665, Dane begged of testifying at the trial in Boston, claiming that his prevailing infirmity prevented his attendance. Dane's unwillingness to help survive the touch test when the afflicted came to Andover in 1692 would have had a further suspicion. Soon Dane's 2 daughters and his daughter-in-law were cried out upon, as well as 5 grandchildren. In all, 28 members of Dane's immediate and extended family would be accused of witchcraft. The turmoil in Andover only really came to an end in the mid-October, when Dane and Bernard closed ranks and healed any breach by joining 20 other Andover men in petitioning Governor Phipps and the General Court in support of the innocence and blameless character of the Andover accused. They went so far as to suggest that some people who had confessed to witchcraft were actually innocent, and that there had been an inducement to them on such things, as we cannot since find they have a conscience of it. The petitioners noted that some of the confessors now said they have wronged themselves, and the truth is their confessions. Those who confessed to witchcraft in 1692 are a large and important element of the afflicted. Perhaps the most chilling statistic of trials is that not one of those who confessed to witchcraft was put to death, while all the 19 who refused to confess were executed, with the exception of Samuel Wardwell, who first confessed and then retracted his confession. At the start of his trial, Wardwell owned that the written confession was taken from his mouth and that he had said it, but now admitted that he had lied in doing so. Wardwell would soon be found guilty and subsequently executed. His confession highlights a legal strategy he and many others that were accused took during the trials. Traditionally, a confession had been considered the single most reliable way to gain conviction and execution on charges of witchcraft. Just 4 years earlier in Boston, Goody Glover had confessed in the court that she had tortured the Goodwin children through image magic. After physicians examined and determined her to be of sound mind, the court accepted her confession and she was hanged. Yet Tituba had confessed to witchcraft back on March the 1st, and though she sat in jail in Boston, she had yet even to be indicted. Meanwhile, throughout most of the summer, only those who refused to confess had been tried and executed. So when Wardwell was questioned about witchcraft on September 1st, he and others appeared to have believed that confessing would at least delay their trial and execution, and might possibly even spare their lives. A plea of not guilty seemed to promise only a quick trial, conviction, and execution, for everyone tried by the court had been found guilty and sentenced to death. Not only did Wardwell confess, but on September the 5th, he testified against Mary Taylor and Jane Lilly at their examinations. Only when the Court of Oyer and Terminer began its 4th and final session on September 6 were confessors finally being tried and convicted. The first confessed to face the court was Dorcas Hall. She was convicted and condemned to death. Therefore, on Tuesday, September 13th, when Wardwell stood before the grand jury, the court read his confession to him. He recanted it rather than affirmed it. Wardwell decided to clear his conscience by retracting his confession, for he now believed that he should die for it, whether he owned it or not. Yet others were willing to damn their souls and make a false confession. A total of 55 people confessed being witches in 1692, more than a third of the total accused. When they did so, they had no way of knowing whether their lives would be spared, though by the time Burroughs was executed on August 19th, it was clear that straightforward denials would be no use. Anyone who had pled not guilty was quickly convicted and executed, even a minister. Confession and cooperation at least gave the advantage of delay and offered some hope that the individual might ultimately be spared. Some of the accused yielded to extensive pressure from the court, the community, and even family to plead guilty. In some cases, confessions were coerced, A number of the accused cracked under the strain of their interrogation by officials. From the first examination of the first accused, it was clear that the judges accepted the presence of witches and dedicated themselves to rooting them out. When Hathorne and Corwin held the first pre-trial hearing on March the 1st, Hawthorne's inquisition of Sarah Good set the tone. Hawthorne: Sarah Good, what evil spirit have you familiarity with? Good: none. Hathorne: have you made no contact with the devil? Sarah Good: no. Hathorne: why do you hurt these children? Sarah Good: I do not hurt them, I scorn it. Hathorne: why do you employ them to do it? Good: I employ nobody. Hathorne: what creature do you employ then? Good: no creatures, but I am falsely accused. Hathorne was an active and insistent prosecutor, demanding, Sarah Good, do you not see now what you have done? Why do you not tell us the truth? Why do you thus torment these poor children? Good could only simply reply, I do not torment them. Faced with such relentless questioning, along with harsh physical treatment, Titchell would eventually become the first to confess. Robert Cleave claimed that Samuel Parris beat Titchell to get to admit her guilt. As a rigorous critic of Cotton Mather's defence of trials, Cleave was not an unbiased observer. Still, Reverend Hale noted that, after the confessions, Titchell was taken to prison and, being searched by a woman, was found to have upon her body the marks of the devil's wounding of her. When she confessed, Titchell admitted to being visited by the devil's familiars, who scratched her because she would not serve them. Possibly Titchell wove this detail into a story to explain fresh marks in her body that were a result of beating. One wonders what would have happened had Parris and the judges not coerced Titchell to confessing. The Salem witchcraft outbreak might conceivably have been limited to 3 people, a fairly typical case of no particular note, and certainly not a pivotal moment in American history. Instead, Parris, Corwin and Hathorne's collective fears of witchcraft and their zeal to find it would trigger something they could never have imagined in their darkest dreams. Cleave was not only one to describe forced confessions in October. Increased Mathers visited 11 of the confessed witches in their prison and recorded their recantations, which included their reasons for initially confessing. Mary Tyler said that her brother and Reverend Emerson put so much pressure on her that she felt like she would be hanged if she does not confess, and the other women spoke similar pressures. Thomas Brattle complained about what methods from damnation were taken, with what violence urged, how unseasonably they were kept up, what buzzings and chuckings of the hand were used, and the like. I am sure that you would call them, as I do, rude and barbarous methods. Nathaniel Carey referred to his wife being forced to stand with her arms outstretched, having heavy shackles that gave her convulsions. John Proctor wrote from prison to 5 ministers complaining that 3 boys, including his son William, had their neck and heels tied together until blood gushed from their noses to coerce confessions. Endless interrogations, sleep deprivation, were punctuated by strip searches that looked for the witch's teeth and other preternatural signs of Satan. Samuel Ladd pointed to the minister's abilities to force confessions as well, starting with certain accused who were distracted, melancholy, or otherwise not in the right mind. Brattle complained that some of the 55 confessors contradicted themselves with the testimony because they were crazed, distempered. Reverend Francis Dane described the daughter Elizabeth as weak, incaptious, fearful, and his granddaughter Elizabeth Johnson Jr. as simply at ye best. These pressures were combined with others, including women's sense of self-worth. Scholars have quite naturally made a strong link between women's confessions and their place in the Puritan society, as they are the weaker vessel. Women were all too regularly reminded, sometimes forcefully, that they were susceptible to sin and the temptation of the devil, so they tended to believe what they were told. If they were sinful, it was believed to be their nature to be sinful. This is made apparent in their conversion narratives. Their public confessions made before the congregation when they asked to become a church member. Unlike men, women went to great lengths to these confessions to speak about their sinfulness and despicable condition. It's quite possible that, once accused of witchcraft, a devout woman may have looked inward to search for sins. If she found even ordinary sins such as envy or greed, she may have viewed this as a sign that she was indeed renouncing God and making a pact with Satan. When Rebecca Nurse was told by the family and friends that she was under suspicion of witchcraft, she maintained her innocence. Nonetheless, she still believed that the sins she unknowingly committed had led to the charges. I am innocent as a child unborn, but surely, she said, what sin hath God found out in me, unrepentant of that he should lay such an affliction upon me in my old age? By confessing, women were acceding to the patriarchal order, and their ministers and authorities were convinced they were all witches. Then perhaps it was so. Even if they had doubts, it was a New England way for the community to put aside their differences and come together during a crisis by admitting guilt. They yielded the impossible pressure of the community's expectations of female behaviour, set themselves up as models to show how redemption through confession should work to heal differences in the community. The case of Sarah Keene of Kittery, Maine, demonstrates how community expectations could combine women's fear of their sinful nature and concerns over body image to convince themselves that they might be a witch. At least 10 years after the Salem trials, she asked her neighbour Elizabeth Pettigrew if a person might not be a witch and not know it. Pettigrew said she thought not, but Keene said her mistress often told her she might. Furthermore, Keene was doubtful of herself because of a teat or dug which grew under one of her own breasts. Keene confided in another woman that she was afraid, in the time of the witchcraft, she should be taken up for a witch. About 4 years later, long-standing suspicions about Keene combined with the unexplained death of the neighbour's child led Sarah to lead wonder whether she was indeed a witch. Her sentiments were recorded only because Keene sued a man for slander when she was accused of witchcraft in 1725. At least by this time she finally recognised she was not a witch. In 1692 the confessions began in earnest in early July, when the accusation spread to Andover. In the middle of the month, 9 people from Andover and the adjoining towns of Haverhill and Billerica were confessed, bringing a total of 18 confessions out of 82 accused. The percentage of confessions will continue to rise over the rest of summer in September. A total of 45 Andover residents would be accused of witchcraft, and all but 6 would initially confess. A substantial number of Andover confessions were children and young unmarried adults. Here again one can see the dutiful behaviour of youths in a patriarchal order, confessing as they were told to do by their magistrates and other superiors. The Andover confessions were almost formulaic. The judges wrote down only the parts of the confessions that supported the charges. The confessor agreed that the devil had come to them, usually at first in form of a familiar, perhaps a bird, a dog or a cat. The devil offered them money, a good life, a promise of protection from the Indians in return for signing a contract. Sometimes it was a paper or even birch bark, but very often it was in the devil's book. Confessors also agreed that they had been baptized by the devil in local bodies of water. It's interesting that they say that because, like I said, the devil cannot do that. Andover's 5-mile pond, the Shawsheen River, or Newbury Falls, they further attended satanic masses where they ate red bread and drank stolen communion wine. Okay. Again, the devil cannot baptize people, okay? I don't know why that's in the witch trials, and I have no idea who would have that to say, but it's just not possible at all. So when we come back, guys, hopefully it will be the last part of the accused, and after that we'll look into the judges, but there is one more part to the accused after this part. Thank you for listening to this part of the Salem witch trials, and many blessings.